Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. If this is your first time, let me give you a quick rundown on what we're all about. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we build fun and inexpensive focused commander decks. A focused commander deck is more tuned than a casual deck, but not quite to the level of a competitive or optimized deck. Today's episode is going to be a special one though, where we exclude the cost of the commander. With just a $25 budget, it's pretty much impossible to build around some commanders unless we do so. Sometimes you get lucky and open up a commander in a pack, or you could just trade for them if you really want to build around them. So our budget is still going to be $25, but again, that's $25 for just 99 cards because we're excluding the cost of that commander. And prices on this show are powered by our sponsor, TCGPLAYER. Before we get started today though, make sure you go check out our new classic pink playmat and Commander's Quarters t-shirts on thecommandersquarters.com. And thank you to everyone who's already purchased our merchandise, it really does help support the channel. Also, make sure that you subscribe to the channel and click that little bell notification icon so that you can stay up to date in the latest Commander's Quarters episodes. Today's commander is Sliver Hivelord. Sliver Hivelord is a 5/5 sliver that costs Wooburg. It says sliver creatures you control have indestructible. This is a very straightforward commander to build around. Indestructible is an extremely powerful keyword, and Sliver Hivelord gives that to every single one of our slivers. Just a quick note, although we have access to all 5 colors, we're just going to focus on 3 of them for this deck. Since we're under a budget constraint, by focusing only on a few of the colors, we're going to make our deck more consistent. And from what I found, the 3 best colors for slivers in our budget are green, white, and red. Since our commander is a crucial part to this deck, though, we still want to make sure that we can cast it. So we're still going to be running ways to ramp and fix our mana, but we are going to be focusing on those 3 colors so that we can make sure that we can still cast spells even if we don't have all of our colors available. This way we can still have an affordable, focused deck that performs well. So our strategy for this deck is very simple. We want to play a ton of slivers and then get Sliver Hivelord out. Like our commander, all of our slivers have effects that make our entire team better. And with our commander out, it's going to be very hard for our opponents to deal with any of those slivers. So how do we win with this deck? Well, we're going to dominate our opponents with our supercharged slivers. Our commander protects our entire team, so we can just keep adding more and more slivers that produce more and more effects. Eventually, we're going to have a giant army of huge slivers that our opponents just can't stop. As with all Commander's Quarters decks, I'm going to break this deck down into 10 different tactics that show you how the deck works and how you're going to win with it. So let's start off with tactic number 1, build the Hive. First up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice to search our library for a basic land and put into play tapped. Then there's Sphere of the Suns, which enters the battlefield tapped with 3 charge counters on it, and we can tap to remove one of those charge counters from it to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. Next up is Pillar of Origins, which when it comes into the battlefield, we're going to choose slivers, and then we can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, but we can only spend that mana on slivers. And then there's Rampant Growth, which will let us search our library for a basic land and put into play tapped. Farseek is similar, but it's only going to let us search our library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain and put in play tapped. Next up is our Armillary Sphere, which we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice it to search our library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them into our hand. Now while this doesn't ramp us, this does help us fix our mana in order to cast our commander. And then there's Harrow, which makes us sacrifice a land, but we do get to search our library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield untapped. Next, we're going to be running Grow from the Ashes, which will let us search our library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield untapped, and if we kicked it, we get 2 basic lands instead. And then there's Kodama's Reach, which will let us search our library for up to 2 basic land cards, 1 goes onto the battlefield tapped and 1 goes into our hand. But the best form of ramp for this deck is actually our Golden Pig. The Golden Pig is going to be the number 1 card out of our 99, but there's actually an exception for this deck. Since Gemhide Sliver and Mana Weft Sliver pretty much do the exact same thing, they're both going to be considered our Golden Pig. Gemhide Sliver says all slivers have tapped, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and Mana Weft Sliver does the exact same thing except for just our slivers. Not only do both of these creatures help us ramp and fix our mana, but they help every single one of our creatures do the same. By casting more and more slivers, we have more slivers to tap for mana to cast even more slivers. And they both make it very easy for us to cast our commander, even though our commander's got such a restrictive cost. And they even might be able to help us get our commander out earlier than we should be able to. So if we can get a turn 1 sliver down and then one of these down on turn 2, if we hit all of our land drops, we can even get our commander out as early as turn 3. If either of these are in our opening hand, the deck just performs on a different level. And that's why they are both considered the Golden Pig of the deck. So with all this ramp and fixing, what are some of those slivers that we're going to be hoping to cast? Let's go through some that can pump up our team in tactic number 2. This is the Anthem. First up, we've got Blade Sliver, which is going to give all slivers +1/+0. When it comes to this deck, we care a lot more about power than about toughness, because our commander can just give all of our creatures indestructible, which generally can just save them anyway. But we've also got some creatures that buff up our power and toughness with Muscle Sliver and Predatory Sliver. Muscle Sliver is going to give all slivers +1/+1, and Predatory Sliver is just going to give our slivers +1/+1. And then we're going to be running Bone Splitter Sliver, which gives all slivers +2/+0, and Battle Sliver, which is only going to give our slivers +2/+0. Next up, there's Might Sliver, which gives all slivers +2/+2, and Gigantic Sliver, which gives all of our slivers +3/+3. Both of these can turn even our smallest slivers into bigger threats that our opponents actually have to worry about. And then there's Spine Sliver, which has whenever a sliver becomes blocked, that sliver gets +1/+1 until the end of the turn for each creature blocking it. This effect works very well against token decks because they can't just team block to try to kill our creatures then. Next up, we're going to be running Fungus Sliver, which says all slivers have, whenever this creature is dealt damage, put a +1/+1 counter on it. As soon as we get our commander out, this card comes in huge, because then we can just swing away without fear of our creatures dying, and every single time they get blocked, they just get bigger. But perhaps the fastest way that we can increase our team's damage is with Double Strike. Bone Scythe Sliver is going to give all of our creatures Double Strike, and Fury Sliver will give every single sliver Double Strike. These can turn every single one of our slivers into huge threats, especially our commander, which is going to be hitting for 10 without any other buffs. But now that we've talked about offense, we've got to talk about defense. So let's go through some ways that our slivers can defend themselves in tactic number 3, natural defenses. First up, we're going to be running Plated Sliver, which gives all slivers +0/+1, and Steel Form Sliver, which gives all of our slivers +0/+1. And then there's Watcher Sliver, which is going to give all slivers +0/+2. These creatures are great for us to have out early before we have our commander out so they can help protect our team. Next, we're going to be running Striking Sliver, which gives all of our slivers first strike, and Talon Sliver, which gives every sliver first strike. And then there's Lymph Sliver, which has all sliver creatures have Absorb 1. And that means if a source would deal damage to a sliver, prevent 1 of that damage. Again, without our commander in play, these cards can still really help keep our team alive. But perhaps the best of these is Ward Sliver. When Ward Sliver comes into play, we get to choose a color, and then all slivers have protection from that color. So this not only helps us protect our team from that color, but it also helps us get some attacks through. So we've talked about powering up our team and protecting our team, but what about making them a little bit faster? Let's go through some ways to do that in tactic number 4, Quick Critters. First up, we've got Heart, Blur, and Reflex Sliver, all of which are going to give our slivers haste. Heart Sliver and Reflex Sliver also are going to give our opponent's slivers haste, but generally we're not going to be playing against other sliver decks, so that doesn't really matter. The important part though is that we're going to be speeding up our deck and speeding up our kill clock on our opponents. And we're also going to be running Quick Sliver, which has Flash and says any player may cast sliver spells as though they had Flash. So this gives us a lot of flexibility when it comes to when we want to cast our slivers, and we can even surprise our opponents out of nowhere. So we've talked about some ways that slivers can help our own creatures, but what about some slivers that can actually hurt our opponent's creatures? Let's go through them now in tactic number 5, Survival of the Fittest. First up is Quilled Sliver, which has all slivers have tapped. This creature deals 1 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. The more slivers that we have on the board with this, the harder combat becomes for our opponents. And then we're going to be running Hunter Sliver, which has all slivers have Provoke. And that means whenever a sliver attacks, its controller may have target creature defending player controls untap and block if able. This card just basically turns every single one of our slivers into targeted removal spells. Next up, there's Constricting Sliver, which has sliver creatures you control have, when this sliver enters the battlefield, you may exile target creature and opponent controls until this creature leaves the battlefield. With our commander in play, this makes it especially hard for our opponents to ever get their creatures back. And finally, we're going to be running Thorncaster Sliver, which has sliver creatures you control have, whenever this creature attacks, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So we can either use the damage that our slivers are producing to take out our opponent's creatures, or we can even just use it to take out our opponents themselves. With the right board state, Thorncaster Sliver really speeds up our kill clock. But what are some of the other ways that we can get some damage through and speed up our kill clock? Let's go through them now in tactic number 6, Around and Through. First up, we've got Two-Headed Sliver, which gives all slivers menace, and Belligerent Sliver, which gives all of our sliver creatures menace. With either of these in play, our opponents are going to have to assign 2 creatures to block each of our slivers. This makes it very hard for them to block effectively, so we're definitely going to get some damage through. And some other ways to get damage through are with Battering Sliver and Ground Shaker Sliver. Battering Sliver is going to give all slivers trample, and Ground Shaker Sliver is going to give sliver creatures that we control trample. With all the slivers that we have that pump our team, both of these cards come in huge in helping us get some damage through. So we've already gone through a ton of slivers, but we're not quite done just yet. Let's round it out with the rest of them in tactic number 7, Bug Collection. First up, we're going to be running Hive Stirrings, which is a very simple sorcery. It's going to put 2 1/1 colorless sliver creature tokens onto the battlefield. Now, although these tokens aren't threatening on their own, with all the other buffs that they're going to get from our other slivers, they can be huge threats. And then there's Sentinel Sliver, which is going to give all of our slivers Vigilance. This card is especially good when our commander's in play because we can just attack our opponents relentlessly. Next up, there's Spinneret Sliver, which is going to give all slivers Reach. Since none of our slivers in this deck fly, it's a good way for us to defend against flyers. And then there's Victual Sliver, which has all slivers have pay 2, sacrifice this permanent, you gain 4 life. Hopefully we won't need to use this ability, but it can save us in a pinch. Next up, we're going to be running Homing Sliver, which has Sliver Cycling for 3, and each sliver card in each player's hand has Sliver Cycling for 3. Sliver Cycling means that we can pay 3, discard this card, and then search our library for a sliver card, reveal it, and then put it into our hand, and then shuffle our library. Basically, this card just turns every single one of our slivers into a tutor for other slivers. And finally, there's Virulent Sliver, which has all sliver creatures have Poisonous 1. This means that whenever a sliver deals combat damage to a player, that player gets a poison counter, and a player with 10 or more poison counters loses the game. This can be a very powerful effect, but make sure you don't get it confused with Infect. It is a different ability. So now that we've gone through every single one of our slivers in this deck, what are some ways that we can actually get to those cards? Let's go through some ways that we can do that now in tactic number 8, Burrow Down. First up, there's Harmonize, which is going to draw us 3 cards for 4 mana, and that's a fantastic rate. And then we're going to be running Hazoret's Monument, which has a dual purpose for this deck. First off, it's going to make our red creature spells we cast cost 1 less to cast. And then whenever we cast a creature spell, we can discard a card. If we do, we're going to draw a card. So while this doesn't provide us with card advantage, it does help us get rid of any dead cards in our hand. Next up, there's Guardian Project, which says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, draw a card. Since all of our creatures have different names, we're just going to draw a card whenever one of them enters the battlefield. And then we're going to be running Overwhelming Instinct, which says whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures, draw a card. This can be a very aggressive deck, especially once we get our commander in play. So attacking with 3 creatures is very easy for us, and it's nice to get some benefit out of it. Next up is Colossal Majesty, which says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. With all the Anthem effects in this deck, this threshold is very easy for us to meet even without our commander. And then there's Hunter's Instinct, which says choose target creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker this turn, draw that many cards. At instant speed, this is a fantastic combat trick that can draw us a ton of cards. And finally, we're going to be running Shamanic Revelation and Collective Unconscious, both of which are going to draw us a card for each creature that we control. On top of that, Shamanic Revelation is going to gain us 4 life for each creature that we control with power 4 or greater. Now, drawing cards is great and all, but what are some of the other ways that we can get some slivers onto the field? Let's go through those ways now in tactic number 9, Sliver Sighting. When Mirror of the Forebears enters the battlefield, we're going to choose slivers. And then anytime we can pay 1 and until the end of the turn, it's going to become a copy of target sliver that we control, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. So this can either become a copy of one of our biggest threats, or it can even just double up one of our effects that we want it to. And then we're going to be running Bring to Light, which has Converge. Search your library for a creature, instant, or sorcery card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of colors spent to cast Bring to Light, exile that card, then shuffle your library. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. This is a fantastic way for us to tutor up one of those slivers that we need and put them directly onto the battlefield. And finally, we're going to be running Wild Pair, which says whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand, you may search your library for a creature card with the same total power and toughness and put it onto the battlefield. If you do, shuffle your library. A ton of our slivers have the same total power and toughness, so this becomes a great way for us to tutor for them and put them directly onto the battlefield. Alright, so we've talked about some amazing slivers and some great cards that help them out, but what about finishing off the game? Let's go through some ways to do that in tactic number 10, Unbreakable. First up, we're going to be running Sublime Exhalation, which is going to destroy all creatures. On top of that, it has Undaunted, so it's going to cost us 1 less to cast for each of our opponents. And then Fumigate is also going to destroy all creatures, but we're going to gain 1 life for each creature that's destroyed this way. So with our commander in play, both of these are basically one-sided board wipes. While our opponent's boards are going to be decimated, ours is going to remain untouched. So then we can feel free to swing out and finish off all of our opponents. Next up, we're going to be running a Chroma's Vengeance, which is going to destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. This card can be absolutely detrimental to our opponents and really not affect us at all. And speaking of detrimental cards, we're going to be running Planar Cleansing and Hour of Revelation. Both of these will destroy all non-land permanents, and Hour of Revelation will even cost 3 less to cast if there are 10 or more non-land permanents on the battlefield. Our commander has an insanely powerful effect, and we really want to take advantage of it in any way that we can. By completely wiping out our opponent's boards, we can easily win the game from there. But now that we've gone through the cards that help us win with this deck, let's go through the cards that help make it happen. It's time to go on to the mana base. First up, we're going to be running Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, both of which can tap to sacrifice themselves to search our library for a basic land and put in play tapped. And then we're going to be running Mountain Valley, which enters the battlefield tapped, and we can tap to sacrifice it to search our library for either a mountain or a forest and put it onto the battlefield untapped. Rocky Tar Pit does the exact same thing, but it's for a swamp or a mountain. Next up, there's Jund Panorama, which can tap for a colorless, or can pay 1 to tap and sacrifice it to search our library for either a swamp, mountain, or forest and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Grixis Panorama does the exact same thing, except it's for an island, swamp, or mountain. And then there's Warp Landscape, which can tap for a colorless, or we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice it to search our library for a basic land and put into play tapped. Next up is Blighted Woodland, which can either tap for a colorless, or we can pay 3 and a green to tap and sacrifice it to search our library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Next up, we've got Nomad Outpost, Mystic Monastery, and Frontier Bivouac, each of which enter the battlefield tapped and tap for 2 of our main colors. And then there's Seaside Citadel, Sandstep Citadel, and Savage Lands, each of which enter the battlefield tapped and also tap for 2 of our main colors. Next up, there's Jungle Shrine, which is a tricolored land that will tap for all of our main colors, but it does enter the battlefield tapped. Finally, we're going to be running 21 basic lands. 8 of those are going to be a forest, 6 will be a plains, 3 will be a mountain, 2 will be islands, and 2 will be swamps. And now that we've gone through every single card in this deck, let's do a quick price check. A quick reminder that our deck costs are calculated using TCGPLAYER optimization, optimizing with even heavily played and damaged cards because those cards need a home too. The average Sliver Hivelord EDHREC deck is going to set you back $179.72. Let's say we compare to that. Our deck is going to be much more affordable, coming in at just $24.94. And just a quick reminder that our deck cost actually doesn't include our commander because it is a commander excluded episode. Again, Commander's Quarters decks are built to be tuned in focused within their budget, but there are always ways that we can improve on them. So let's go through some reasonable upgrades to see what some of those ways just might be. First up, there's Sanu Sliver, which comes in at $2.43. It's a 1/1 sliver that costs 1 and a white, and it says all slivers get +1/+1. This is basically just another version of Muscle Sliver, and we're looking for as many pump effects as we can get in the deck. And then there's Harmonic Sliver, which comes in at $2.38. It's a 1/1 sliver that costs 1 green white, and it says all slivers have when this creature comes into play, destroy target artifact or enchantment. This is a fantastic way for us to deal with our opponent's artifacts and enchantments at basically no cost for us. Next up there's Venom Sliver, which comes in at $1.41. It's a 1/1 sliver that costs 1 and a green, and it says sliver creatures you control have death touch. This turns even our small slivers into deadly threats against our opponent's creatures. And then there's Essence Sliver, which comes in at $1.80. It's a 3/3 sliver that costs 3 and a white, and it says whenever a sliver deals damage, its controller gains that much life. This is a fantastic way to help us either stabilize or stay way ahead of our opponents. Next up is Brood Sliver, which comes in at $3.33. It's a 3/3 sliver that costs 4 and a green, and it says whenever a sliver deals combat damage to a player, its controller may put a 1/1 colorless sliver creature token into play. This card is absolutely incredible at helping us build up our army and creating more and more powerful slivers. Finally, there's Sliver Hive, which comes in at $6.27. It's a land that can either tap for a colorless or can tap to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, and we can spend this mana only to cast a Sliver spell, or we can pay 5 and tap it to put a 1/1 colorless Sliver creature token onto the battlefield, but we can only activate this ability if we control a Sliver. This is a fantastic card for this deck that helps us fix our mana and can even put more slivers onto the battlefield. And with that, our show is coming to a close, but I really just want to hear about what you think about this deck, so why don't you let me know in the comments below. When you're buying decks like this one, or just individual cards, make sure you use that decklist link in the description below. Not only will you be getting great prices on TCGPLAYER, but you're also going to be supporting this show because they sponsor us. And make sure that you follow us on social media so you can get some early hints on who the next commander just might be. Links to our social media accounts can be found in the description. Also in the description below is a link to the Commander's Quarters Patreon page, and I just want to say a quick thank you to the patrons who have subscribed so far. There are many benefits to being a patron for the Commander's Quarters, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There's even a general level tier where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. I truly couldn't do this without all of your support, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel, and then check out some of our playlists on budget commander decks, commander excluded decks, and break the bank episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again, and have a good one.